Next, we move on to breaking down the plot of episode 183. Before watching, please leave a like. Your support helps us release new chapters regularly. The people of Mulan attacked Tiannan, and Han Li, who had reached the early nascent soul stage, arrived at the front line on behalf of the Falling Cloud sect to support the defense. There he discovered that an enemy Mulan cultivator at the same stage looked exactly like one of the phantom figures created by the true devil art of the Six Extremes. Thus began a battle at the peak of the nascent soul stage. Han Li asked what connection his opponent had with the Six Paths Supreme Saint. The man only replied coldly that he knew no such Six Paths Supreme Saint, then added that empty words would not buy time, and immediately launched his attack. The giant warrior was stunned at first, but then bared his teeth and fiercely swung his hand wrapped in black chi. A black object flew out of the darkness and shot straight toward Han Li. As soon as it left the veil of darkness, a black flash appeared, and the object vanished into thin air. Seeing this, Han Li's face darkened, and he instantly retreated several zhang backward. At the place where he had just been standing, a huge green ghostly claw suddenly appeared, sweeping forward at full speed, but naturally grasping nothing but empty air. The demonic giant, seeing his strike miss, gave a surprised snort. Han Li calmly remarked that the enemy's technique was extremely similar to that of ghost cultivators. Although he was not using the ghost path, but rather some demonic art, his attack methods were almost identical, enough to easily deceive an opponent. Hearing this, the giant within the black chi froze and silently stared at Han Li with a cold gaze. But at that very moment, Han Li frowned and abruptly shifted diagonally another several zhang. A second green claw burst soundlessly out of the ground beneath the spot where he had just stood, yet this sudden strike also missed its target once again. Now the giant could no longer hold back and asked how Han Li had avoided the attacks of the ghost eagle claw again and again, and whether he had seen true ghost cultivators before. At last, an important clue slipped into his words. With a faint smile, Han Li replied that of course he had, otherwise he would not have dodged so easily. The giant gave a cold snort and admitted that his technique did indeed belong to the demonic path, but declared that it changed nothing, for the power of his true devil art of heavenly slaughter was so great that Han Li would die in the very next moment. After saying that, he clearly had no intention of continuing the conversation. Suddenly he threw back his head and let out a shrill, piercing laugh, so harsh it seemed able to split metal and stone. At the sight of this, the calm on Han Li's face quickly faded, replaced by caution and concentration. The black chi before him spun like a raging storm, sweeping away all in its path. Then an astonishingly powerful demonic aura erupted from the void. A massive shadow shot out from the black whirlwind, leaving a trail of afterimages behind it, and in the next instant it was directly in front of Han Li. The shadow moved both arms slightly, and at once a rain of blue-black claws appeared, covering Han Li from all sides without a single opening. It was obvious that the enemy intended to tear Han Li into countless bloody pieces using nothing but those sharp claws. Han Li took a deep breath, yet neither dodged nor retreated. He merely rubbed his palms together and thrust them upward. A clap of thunder rang out, and above his head a pale golden net of lightning suddenly appeared, fearlessly rushing straight to meet the storm of claws. The black shadow was startled for a moment, but there was no time to think. The claws came crashing down mercilessly with full force. In its mind, ordinary demonic techniques might perhaps fear lightning, but its true devil art of heavenly slaughter could not be compared to such common methods. Some miserable little lightning, it believed, could never harm it in the slightest. And this cultivator, who clearly knew something extremely troublesome, would soon die. But before the shadow could finish that thought, it suddenly felt its claws seared by unbearable heat. A moment later, excruciating pain burst from them, and dazzling golden light exploded before its eyes. The lightning net woven from golden arcs broke through the curtain of claws in a single strike. Worse still, it descended from above onto the enormous shadow itself. Seeing this, the enemy suddenly panicked, realizing it had heard of such golden arcs before. When the net completely covered it, it finally remembered the old legends. This was one of the greatest banes of the true devil art of heavenly slaughter. Back during the demonic invasion, The elders had repeatedly warned about such things. But after going so long without meeting a worthy opponent at the same level, it had forgotten all about it. The shadow's face turned blue with terror, yet it had no intention of surrendering. With a loud roar, the enemy abruptly shrank its huge body. Crackling explosions accompanied the transformation, and in the blink of an eye the giant became a dwarf no more than 3 chi tall, stretching out the time of contact with the golden net. Using that brief moment it had gained, it immediately exploded with a muffled bang. Its body scattered into countless fine black threads, gleaming like pitch. Those threads shot in all directions, trying to break free. A cold light flashed in Han Li's eyes. He sharply shook both hands, controlling the golden lightning. The net flared and burst apart into countless arcs. Yet at once a new net of light formed from them, far denser than before, and it instantly began rapidly shrinking. So as soon as the black threads shot outward, they struck the golden net one after another and hissed loudly. Under the bombardment of lightning, the threads turned into clouds of black smoke, while shrill screams and ghastly wails rang out from inside. In the end, the threads retreated in fear to the very center of the net and gathered once more into a grotesque infant, black and glossy, as if coated in oil. Terror was frozen across its face. It opened its mouth and began spewing stream after stream of dense black chi. Layer upon layer, that chi wrapped around its body, desperately trying to resist the evil-repelling divine lightning that had already drawn near. Han Li's face remained cold and merciless. A trace of mockery flickered across his lips. The golden arcs shooting from his hands suddenly grew thicker and brighter. The light struck so fiercely that it was impossible to look it directly. Piercing cries rang out again from inside the net, but under the endless thunder they soon began to fade. A few moments later, everything finally fell silent. Seeing this, Han Li at last let out a breath of relief. The golden lightning curled up and withdrew, leaving only a black storage pouch in his hand. After that, he raised his eyes to the sky and flew back at once. Everything from the brief exchange of words to the enemy's destruction had taken only an instant. The thick-browed, bald giant below, Old Man Ma, and the others all stared at what had happened in complete shock. Even the great Mulan masters above, Gao Shou and Ku Yao, also stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to believe what they had seen. The Tianan cultivators did not know the origin of the black-robed men, but those two knew very well who they were dealing with. The mysterious cultivators had come from a vast empire located beyond the Mulan grasslands. Although the reason for their sudden appearance in Mulan territory was unclear, and no one understood exactly what agreement they had made with the divine masters of the 3 tribes, one thing was certain: their techniques and abilities far surpassed those of Tianan cultivators at the same stage. They had not even entered a true large-scale battle yet, and already they had successively killed 2 nascent soul cultivators from the south. That was precisely why the 2 great Mulan masters had placed such trust in the black-robed men and their strength. One of them had been sent into the second duel in order to kill or severely wound at least one of the guardians of the Grand Formation through surprise. But who could have expected that what looked like an ordinary young man would step out against them, and in just a few moves utterly destroy the black-robed cultivator? Even his nascent soul had failed to escape. How could they not be deeply shocked? Only now did Gao Shou and Ku Yao come back to their senses, exchange frightened glances, and hesitate for the first time. They did not know whether to continue the duels or simply order all the masters standing behind them to attack at once. But at that moment, a barely audible voice suddenly sounded in their ears. Though almost impossible to hear, it carried a clear command. Today our fighting spirit has already been broken, so for now we retreat. We will return tomorrow, and by then perhaps this formation will already be doomed on its own. As for Tian Ku, whether he lives or dies will indeed cause some trouble, but I will personally explain everything to the Divine Masters. It was impossible to tell whether the voice belonged to a man or a woman, yet authority was unmistakably woven into its tone. Although Gao Shou and Ku Yao were startled, they did not object and obeyed immediately. They turned to the masters standing behind them and loudly issued the order. A disturbance arose among them, but no one voiced any objection. The front ranks at once became the rear, and the army slowly began to withdraw, while the two great masters naturally remained behind to cover the retreat. Before leaving, they cast gloomy glances at the Tianan cultivators, then fixed Han Li with particularly fierce stares. Only after that did the two turn around and fly away. Watching the retreating army of masters, Gu Shuangpu uncertainly asked whether they should give chase. But the thick-browed, bald giant shook his head and answered that although the Milan people had withdrawn, they had not yet been defeated. If their group rashly rushed forward, they themselves could easily end up surrounded. Better to rely on the formation and wait calmly while conserving strength. The 1,000-image illusion formation of Huanglong Mountain was not so easily broken. Even if the Milan people did manage to take it, they would not succeed without losing more than half of their masters. As he said all this, the giant could not help glancing at Han Li once more. The scene of his lightning-fast victory had shaken everyone too deeply. When Han Li flew back, an awkward silence fell among the cultivators for a while. No one knew what to say. Han Li himself, however, looked entirely calm. He merely tucked the black storage pouch into his sleeve, which he had been casually toying with before, and gave everyone a slight smile. Before, no one would have paid any special attention to such a smile from Han Li, but now, after he had personally destroyed a cultivator at the same stage, everyone suddenly sensed something unfathomable and profound in his calm manner. All of their earlier faint contempt vanished without a trace. The thick-browed bald giant was the first to recover and congratulate Han Li, saying that such a swift execution of an enemy master was truly worthy of admiration. He promised that after returning, he would certainly report it to the Alliance, which would no doubt reward Han Li handsomely. Old Man Ma and Gu Shuangpu also finally came to their senses, showering Han Li with praise and congratulations. But a distinct change could already be felt in their attitude. Between the lines, respect and even a touch of awe had begun to show. Han Li pretended not to notice any of this at all and politely exchanged a few courteous words in return. Yet during the conversation, he casually let his gaze linger on one of those present a little longer than usual several times. And when no one was watching his face, a faint mocking smile flickered at the corners of his mouth. After the army of masters had finally disappeared from sight, the thick-browed giant opened a passage through the sea of mist. Everyone quickly entered, and the entrance closed behind them once more. Around Huanglong Mountain, silence returned again. Back in the main hall, they did not discuss much. After speaking briefly about today's battle, they all dispersed to rest. This was especially true for Old Man Ma. His treasure had been destroyed, and his vital energy had suffered greatly. More than anyone else, he needed to take medicine and meditate quietly to restore his magical power. Soon only the thick-browed bald giant remained in the hall. He sat in the seat of honor, head lowered, lost in deep thought. No one knew what he was thinking about, but after some time, his brows suddenly twitched. A strange expression flashed across his face, and he quietly but sharply told the hidden person to come out. A chuckle sounded in response. The visitor praised his profound skill and remarked that he had been discovered the instant he entered. That, he added, was why the Alliance of 9 Nations had entrusted this side to him alone. Light flashed at the previously empty entrance to the main hall, and the figure of a man appeared with a faint smile. The thick-browed giant frowned and asked why the man had not gone to rest, but instead hidden himself and returned. The visitor replied that he had suddenly uncovered a secret and felt obliged to discuss it with him. When the giant asked what kind of secret it was, doubt finally appeared on his face. Then the newcomer declared without hesitation that Han Li of the Falling Cloud sect was likely a spy for the Milan people. After saying those words, he slowly walked forward. The giant thought the man must have lost his mind. He reminded him that Han Li had personally killed a Mulan master at the nascent soul stage that very day, so such an accusation was simply ridiculous. The visitor sighed and, with a bitter smile, said that he had expected disbelief, but he had evidence. Then he turned over his hand, and a green jade slip flashed into his palm. Taking several more steps, he approached the giant. After a brief hesitation, the giant still rose to meet him and extended a hand. The visitor also raised his hand with a peaceful expression, as though about to pass over the jade slip. But at the very instant the giant's fingers were about to touch it, the visitor's expression changed abruptly. A flash of cruelty appeared in his eyes, green light blazed on the jade slip, and it transformed into a tiny emerald snake. Before one could even blink, it bit deeply into the giant's wrist. Extreme shock showed on the face of the thick-browed man. He opened his mouth as if to shout, but had no time. In the space of a single breath, his face turned dark purple-black, and he collapsed to the floor soundlessly, his whole body limp. The attacker muttered joyfully that the two-tailed emerald snake truly deserved its reputation. In terms of venom, he said, it was probably no weaker than the legendary deadliest poisons. After being bitten, even a nascent soul loses the power to flee the body. If it had wings as well, it would be the perfect killer of cultivators. Taking a step forward, he carefully examined the corpse, which had already begun to slowly melt. Meanwhile, the green snake withdrew its fangs from the body and, flicking its tail, revealed not one but two thin pointed tails. Then it struck the ground with both tails and flew back into its master's palm with a whistle. Coiling up, the snake flicked out a purple-black tongue, and its green back gleamed coldly. The attacker held it in one hand, while with the other he beckoned lightly, and the storage pouch from the corpse flew into his grasp. He excitedly sent his spiritual sense inside, as if searching for something extremely important. But almost immediately he let out a startled breath, failing to find the token he thought he had seen placed there earlier. Unwilling to accept it, he overturned the pouch and dumped out its contents onto the floor. White light poured out from its mouth. On the ground appeared only a heap of cheap artifacts and a pitiful handful of low-grade spirit stones. The moment he saw this, he turned deathly pale. Green light flared around his body, and he immediately rushed toward the exit. But then a long sigh suddenly echoed through the hall. Right afterward, the surrounding walls lit up with silver radiance. Layer after layer of silver light curtains appeared, overlapping like waves. They formed a gigantic shining dome and trapped the attacker inside. The man gave a cold snort and had no thought of stopping. Instead, he slapped the pouch at his waist. A black spirit beast resembling a pangolin shot out of it and slammed its head into the barrier ahead. A dull boom sounded, but the silver wall did not even tremble and simply bounced the beast back. The attacker's heart went cold, yet he quickly gritted his teeth and spat out a blue flying fork. The magical treasure merged with his escaping light and transformed into a thick blue beam that slammed hard into the wall. Again, a heavy rumble sounded, but that strike too was mercilessly reflected several zhang backward. The blue treasure spun through the air and almost dropped to the ground. At that moment, a calm, familiar voice rang out in the hall again. It told Gu Shuangpu that struggling was useless. This main hall was the true center of the grand formation of Huanglong Mountain, and the restrictions here were the strongest in the entire array. Since he had fallen into it himself, there was no way for him to get back out. The voice was utterly familiar. It was the voice of that very same thick-browed bald giant. Gu Shuangpu said grimly that he had expected as much, that his opponent had not truly died. He immediately realized that what lay on the floor had only been a flesh and blood double. He had long known that within the Alliance of Nine Nations there was a mysterious expert skilled in making flesh puppets indistinguishable from the original. He had once believed such stories were only rumors, but now he knew they were true. Within the blue light, a human figure gradually became visible, and it was indeed Gu Shuangpu of the spirit-taming sect. Although his face had darkened, he still tried to remain composed. The thick-browed giant admitted that Gu Shuangpu was extremely well informed about the affairs of the Alliance of Nine Nations. He confirmed that Gu Shuangpu had indeed just killed him, but had only killed a controlled double. If even a nascent soul cultivator had failed to notice the difference, then the substitution must truly have been nearly perfect in appearance. White light flashed outside the dome, and the giant himself stepped into view. He looked at Gu Shuangpu inside the barrier, then lowered his eyes to the double that had dissolved into a pool of blood. Gu Shuangpu gave a disdainful snort and said that outward resemblance meant nothing. If he had not been wary of alerting the other side and refrained from carefully scanning the double with spiritual sense, he would certainly have seen through such a forgery at once. And in addition, he had now realized something else. No matter how lethal his two-tailed emerald snake was, nurtured by him for hundreds of years, it still could not have so easily killed a nascent soul cultivator. At the start, he had only intended to seriously wound his target. But after striking successfully, he had mistakenly thought that he had underestimated the power of his own poison. As he said this, his expression grew even darker, and regret flashed through his eyes. The thick-browed giant, by contrast, smiled. He admitted that he had ordered the creation of such a double merely on a whim. Naturally, he had never believed that a dead puppet could compare to a true external incarnation. But if one such puppet had succeeded in luring out and exposing a traitor colluding with the Mulan people, then the spirit stone spent on it had clearly not been wasted. At those words, Gu Shuangpu's face twitched ever so slightly. He fell silent for a while, then coldly asked whether the other side had known in advance that he would come. From the way it sounded, it was as if the giant had already prepared the double and had been waiting for exactly this attack. Had he been suspected from the moment he arrived at Huanglong Mountain? The thick-browed giant shook his head. He replied that he himself would never have suspected a senior elder of the spirit-taming sect without reason. He had simply been warned in advance by someone else. Though he had doubted it at first, he now fully believed it. Then he loudly called out, telling fellow Taoist Han and brother Ma to stop hiding and come out. Hearing this, Gu Shuangpu could no longer keep up his gloomy composure. Yellow light flashed from the stone walls on both sides of the hall. Two figures emerged from them, the calm Han Li and Old Man Ma with a heavy expression. Old Man Ma said sorrowfully that he had never imagined Gu Shuangpu could sink so low. He asked what kind of benefits the Mulan people had promised him for him to descend into such madness. Gu Shuangpu coldly retorted that there was no madness in it at all, because he himself was one of the Mulan people. Those words stunned the others. The thick-browed giant and the other two had clearly not expected that. Gu Shuangpu continued, saying that no mere bribe could have persuaded a cultivator of his level to side with Mulan if it were only about personal gain. He asked whether the cultivators of Tianan had any idea how scarce cultivation resources were on the Mulan grasslands. Every year, countless low-level masters who could have advanced further missed their best chance for growth simply because they lacked pills and auxiliary resources. In the end, after a little more than 100 years, they turned into piles of white bones. Why should the cultivators of Tianan be allowed to occupy such rich lands, while the masters of Mulan were forced to count every spirit stone down to the last one? If Mulan were given Tianan's cultivation resources, then in less than 100 years the number of its masters would double. And with such strength, they could defeat the immortal teachers of the two people and completely dominate the whole Mulan grassland. As he spoke, a mad light burned ever more fiercely in his eyes. After hearing this, the thick-browed giant and the others exchanged glances. But then Han Li suddenly spoke in a flat, expressionless voice. He remarked that as far as he knew, Mulan's main forces had suffered a crushing defeat in their decisive battle against the two people. Almost half of the Mulan grassland had already fallen into enemy hands. That, he added, was precisely why the Mulan people had resorted to such a desperate gamble against Tianan. Gu Shuangpu's expression changed sharply, and he glared at Han Li in fury. He demanded to know how Han Li could possibly know such things. At once it dawned on him that Han Li must have overheard his secret voice transmission with that hidden master. Han Li calmly admitted that Gu Shuangpu was quite quick-witted. He said that he could hardly be blamed for it. After all, Gu Shuangpu and that hidden master had used voice transmission too carelessly right in front of him. It was simply that Han Li's spiritual sense was a little stronger than that of ordinary cultivators at the same level. That was why he had happened to hear the entire conversation, and afterward merely given fellow Taoist Lu a slight hint. Han Li spoke without the slightest expression, but Gu Shuangpu only grew even more savage. He admitted that he himself was to blame for one fatal oversight. He had hidden in Tianan for so many years, yet right before everything began he had still allowed such a flaw. He declared that he would not die without reason. However, he considered the claim that Han Li's spiritual sense was only a little stronger than usual to be excessive modesty. According to Gu Shuangpu, their voice transmission method had not been ordinary at all. He knew of no other way to silently overhear such an exchange except with spiritual sense at the late nascent soul stage. With those words, he fixed his eyes on Han Li and fell silent. Old Man Ma immediately turned pale at the implication. The thick-browed giant was equally astonished. Hanli himself merely frowned slightly. He had not expected to unintentionally reveal the strength of his spiritual sense. But then his expression smoothed out again, and his face became unreadable once more. That only deepened the doubts of the other two witnesses. It was difficult to believe that someone at the early stage could possess such spiritual sense. The thick-browed giant finally collected himself and coldly declared that now that Gu Shuangpu's identity as a spy had been exposed, they no longer had any reason to spare him. Although he would have preferred to leave him alive and hand him over to the Alliance's enforcers, a great war was at hand, so they would have to destroy both his body and soul right here. After saying that, he turned his gaze away from Han Li and back to Gu Shuangpu. There was nothing left in his eyes now but murderous coldness. Without wasting another moment, he flipped his palm and a silver token for controlling the formation appeared in it. Raising it high, he gave it a slight shake before the dome. With a hiss, a stream of silver radiance burst forth from it and disappeared into the wall of light. At once silver ripples stirred inside the dome, and countless silver flowers appeared out of nowhere. They were dazzlingly beautiful and began drifting gently downward from above. But the instant Gu Shuangpu saw those flowers, his face twisted as though he were looking at venomous scorpions. Without a moment's hesitation, he struck both hands against his own body. Several layers of multicolored defensive screens immediately appeared around him. At the same time, he pointed at the blue flying fork before him. It rapidly spun and hovered over his head. In the next moment, it transformed into a blue curtain of light that shielded him from above. The thick-browed giant told Han Li and Old Man Ma that there was no point in watching further. Even if Gu Shuangpu was powerful, inside that restriction he would not be able to last long. Before long, thunder and fire would completely erase both his body and soul. It would be better to discuss how to explain all of this afterward. No matter what, Gu Shuangpu was a Mulan spy, but he was still an elder of the spirit-taming sect. If they did not think through an explanation for the other alliance members in advance, unnecessary trouble could arise later. After saying this, once the silver flowers had already begun exploding and filling the entire dome, he led the other two aside, clearly confident in the absolute power of that forbidden formation. Han Li, seeing his confidence, simply shifted his gaze in silence. Old Man Ma also frowned, since he shared the same concerns. But Han Li unexpectedly smiled and said that although the matter was indeed troublesome, there was no need to be overly worried. The thick-browed giant no longer dared ignore his words and immediately grew attentive. Old Man Ma also looked up, interested in what Han Li had to say. Han Li explained that the Alliance of Nine Nations had clearly dealt with Mulan spies in Tiannan before. Perhaps only low-level ones had been caught in the past, while a high-level elder was simply a particularly awkward case to explain to the sect. But now things were different. The three witnesses belonged to different factions. If anyone claimed that they had deliberately joined forces to frame only the spirit-taming sect, most people would never believe it. It would be enough simply to tell the story exactly as it happened and also send back the information they had overheard about the Mulan people so that it could be verified. Then, in Han Li's view, no major upheaval would occur. He even added that the spirit-taming sect itself might already have had some suspicions. It was too unbelievable that Gu Shuangpu had gone so many years without ever revealing the slightest flaw. And even if they had never suspected him before, after this incident they would easily find many suspicious traces in his past conduct. As he said this, Han Li calmly stroked his chin and looked completely unperturbed. The thick-browed giant brightened at once. He took out a white jade slip that, it turned out, he had already been holding. With a faint smile, he said that using a secret technique he had already recorded their conversation into the jade slip. When the time came, that too would serve as strong evidence. Hearing this and seeing the jade slip in his hand, Old Man Ma visibly relaxed. His anxiety immediately lessened by more than half. After that, the three discussed the details of what to do next a little longer. But then a strange hissing sound suddenly came from inside the silver dome. All three were startled and exchanged wary glances. The thick-browed giant was just about to act when a deafening explosion rang out. From the roaring thunder and fire, a green-clawed hand suddenly burst out and struck the wall of the dome several times with lightning speed. The entire silver dome shook violently. The giant turned pale and cried out, unable to believe his eyes. He could not imagine that the enemy still had enough strength to shake the forbidden formation like this. Han Li and Old Man Ma were equally stunned. Then the giant quickly formed a seal with both hands. A beam of white light shot into the dome, and the raging thunder and flames inside suddenly froze. Only then did it become possible to see what was happening inside the restriction. The thick-browed giant and Old Man Ma involuntarily sucked in a breath of cold air when they saw the scene within. Even Han Li's face darkened. There was no longer any sign of Gu Shuangpu inside. In his place stood a monstrous creature, half human and half snake. This being, resembling both human and demon at once, still wore Gu Shuangpu's clothes. Its face and the exposed parts of its limbs were covered in green scales. Its eyes were cold and sinister. Behind it writhed two thin snake-like tails several chi long, lightly tapping against the ground. The features between the scales clearly still belonged to Gu Shuangpu. Yet from his half-open mouth, a purple-black snake tongue repeatedly darted in and out. Accompanied by hissing, that tongue appeared and vanished, sending an involuntary chill down one's spine. The moment Old Man Ma saw the creature, he cried out in horror that it was the spirit-binding art. According to him, Gu Shuangpu had fused into one with his two-tailed emerald snake. He could hardly believe that the long-lost secret art of spirit binding truly existed. The thick-browed giant had evidently also heard the bloody legends surrounding this technique. Upon hearing Old Man Ma's words, his expression changed at once, and both fury and alarm surged within him. Like someone facing a deadly enemy, he stared fixedly at the snake-like monster. With his free hand, he hurriedly slapped his storage pouch, and the silver formation token appeared in his hand once more. Spitting a stream of his own essence onto it, he tossed the token above his head. Rapid incantations immediately followed. At the same time, the creature inside the dome also moved. It swept the three beyond the barrier with a dark gaze and rapidly flicked out its snake tongue twice. Then its mouth suddenly split wide all the way to the cheeks, and a stream of purple-black liquid burst from within. It shot straight toward the place where Han Li and the others stood. Seeing this, the giant abruptly stopped chanting. He pointed at the token, and it instantly blazed with silver light in all directions. More than a dozen silver seals flew out of it and shot into the dome one after another. Immediately after, the wall of light flashed, let out a dragon-like hum, and grew even denser. At the same time, in the upper part of the dome, countless silver thunder flowers much larger than before began rapidly taking shape. But the purple-black liquid had already struck the wall of light. A small portion of the dome instantly turned black. That darkness spread swiftly in all directions, and within only a few moments stained an area about a zhang wide. A savage delight flashed across the face of the snake monster. Its two tails slammed into the ground at the same time. The creature turned into a green beam and shot forward at astonishing speed. In only a few breaths, it reached the blackened section of the dome. With a slight twist of its shoulder, the monster mercilessly smashed its green claws into that spot. A loud crash rang out, and the tough wall of light tore open like paper. Seeing the opening, the creature rejoiced even more and at once darted toward it, trying to slip out. The thick-browed giant's face turned pale in horror. He hurriedly spat out his own magical treasure. The white artifact, shaped like a short rod, flared up and immediately spread protection over his whole body. Old Man Ma reacted almost as quickly. With a tense face, he released his ruler-like treasure. It flashed with brilliant light and stopped in front of him like a shield. Both men understood perfectly well that a cultivator at the early nascent soul stage who had used this spirit-binding art was already almost comparable in power to an opponent at the middle stage. So there was no thought in their minds of winning quickly. For now, the important thing was not success, but first avoiding a mistake. But at that exact moment, a helpless sigh came from the side. Han Li stepped forward on his own and decided to enter the battle first. Thank you for your support. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. See you next week.